Hello, everyone. I'm so glad you guys are able to join me today, or whenever you're watching this. Today, I'd like to talk about the books that I read in the month of April. It was a pretty productive reading month, but we're going to start with a little bit of housekeeping. I'll keep this short. There will be timestamps if you want to skip this, but I think this is the last video I'm doing like this. This is a wrap up for the entire month of April, and basically, I just have too much going on in a month to be able to accurately give a recap or go over what I thought of these books in any type of deep way or in a timely way in one big wrap up. So I think I'm going to try doing these bi-weekly, doing them every couple of weeks. Because the first couple books that I talk about here, like I read, over a month ago now, and it's like, man, what did I think of that? What was that plot about? And so there's a lot of general things that I can still talk about, but in order to be able to give anything of substance, I want to do it closer to the time of, because that'll also help me remember the books better. So that's thing one. The second one is I've been doing like tier ranking as I've been doing this, just sort of as a gimmick more than anything, and I've considered dropping that. I don't know how much that adds. I know tier list rankings tend to be like their own separate video that are like rapid fire. These are not rapid fire videos. So it might actually be counterproductive of me. So I might just go through the books without the tier ranking. So I'd like some feedback in the comments if you guys don't mind. Tell me what you think of that as far as not having tier ranking, and then also splitting it up, maybe doing 2 of these a month rather than just one big long video. I mean, I think my last one was like over 50 minutes, which is obscene. That's uncalled for. Nobody wants to watch this for 50 minutes. So let's get right into it here. Let's talk about the first book that I completed in the month of April, and that was Lake of the Long Sun by Gene Wolfe. So this is the second book in the overall Book of the Long Sun by Wolfe. And I guess to put it briefly, when I first read Nightside the Long Sun, which was book 1, I read it and I was like, wow, this was actually a lot more straightforward from a first reading than, say, Shadow with the Torturer is, or a lot of Wolfe stuff. And what I can say about this is the old Wolfe is back. This is where things start getting more elusive. So to go into it a little bit of what this is about, we're still following the priest character of Patera Silk. He bears an extra weight now that he's been chosen by the outsider. There's an extra burden on him that's both like a joy and a sorrow to him. He has extra knowledge and extra responsibility for it. So the book begins with the funeral of a prostitute's daughter that he is performing. And while he's performing this funeral, a god appears to him upon the windows. And we talked a little bit about what that might be in my last wrap up and in the review for Nightside the Long Sun, and gives an even more clear vision to Patera Silk about what the coming destruction will be and what must be done to escape it. At the same time, an underground movement has begun to place Silk in a high position of governmental power known as Calde, the Calde. And the next book's called Calde of the Long Sun, so I'm guessing that goes farther. So this escalates farther and farther as Silk tries to understand more of what the gods want from him, but also as he gets unwillingly sucked deeper into the underbelly of the world's politics. We get a lot more clarity about the world building in this book, but this one moves at a very different pace from the first one. The first book was one of the more other than Sword of the Lictor, the first book probably moved faster than on maybe Castle View, but it moved very fast even for a Wolfe book. But Wolfe is able to get us a lot more context about the plot and about this world by using side characters. So we'll have big blocks of point of view from Silk's point of view, and then we'll go to the point of view of a villain or to side characters that we haven't spent as much time with. So the world gets fleshed out a lot more in this one. And then I'll also say a lot of the last book, there were questions of exorcism and demonic possession that got brought into it. And in this one, the topic of possession is explored a lot more. In the last book, we saw people who believed in evil and demonic possession, but in this novel, gods start invading the bodies of people and possessing them, which leads to a bigger question about who these gods are, because they keep calling them gods, but like, is this a technological thing? Are some of these people like androids? And so you think of like a computer virus invading something. I'm trying to go into this read very like straightforward. I'm not going through a bunch of podcasts and other resources. I'm using that a little bit if I'm super confused about something, but I'm trying to just take the story for what it is rather than trying to unlock every secret on a first read. That'll come when it comes time to reread it. One of the main gods that's worshipped in this book is called Pas. And we get a good bit of his backstory in this book. We learn who he is, some of the history behind why he's worshipped, and all I'll say is that he may or may not be somebody that we're familiar with in the solar cycle up to this point, but in a very different context. So a big part of the history in the world is tied into this character of Pas, who is one of the most interesting mysteries moving forward. So, once again, Silk is still one of Wolf's best characters that I've read so far. He's still very interesting. He's very engaging. We still deal with that struggle that Silk feels of being a priest, trying to follow the moral code that he has, while also being willing to commit crimes or sins as he sees it in service of his gods. So there's a really good push and pull dynamic there. So let's go over to the tier list here. Let's see. Boom. There we go. Okay. And so we've got Wake of the Long Sun right here. And we are probably going to drop this just below the mechanical. I did not enjoy this one quite as much as Nightside the Long Sun. I think it is good. I think it is excellent, actually. But I don't think it is quite as good as the first book in the series. And I probably found Castleview just that much more interesting, if for no other reason than just, it was something different. So we're going to keep it there for now. As one of the other reasons why we might switch up and not do these tier listings as well is because, if we want to do a rapid fire thing, it gives us more opportunities to discuss some of these books and how my perspective has changed on it later on, whereas right now it's kind of set to one thing or another. So let's talk about another book here. And, I'm actually going to skip around in terms of my reading order a little bit. Let's talk about The Thousandfold Thought by R. Scott Baker. Oop, let's change that a little bit. Let's go like that. Okay. Thousandfold Thought. So this is the third and final installment in the Prince of Nothing trilogy by Baker, and it is but it is sort of like the middle point, or one of the middle points to the overall Second Apocalypse series. So Aspect Emperor is after this. What is the Thousandfold Thought about? So, after Kellis has been exalted at the end of Warrior Prophet, he takes further steps to try to fully control this holy war that has been brewing the whole time. A commune must wrestle with his love and his devotion to Kellis, while also having his heart completely broken by him, like eviscerated by some of the things that happen at the end of Warrior Prophet. I'll say this, just as an aside, there is a dramatic line that a commune has at the end of Warrior Prophet that is like seared into my brain as one of the most memorable scenes. I still stand by that. Warrior Prophet's probably among some of the best fantasy novels I've ever read. So he feels a pull to Kellis, but also has his heart broken by him, but also feels a pull to his sorcerer school and the loyalty there. So this book mainly deals with the fallout of the bombastic ending of book 2. And this is probably the most divisive book, except for maybe the last one, in the Second Apocalypse series, at least from what I can tell. From online stuff, there's a lot of people who find this one disappointing. I know Mike at Mike's Book Review said that this one was not his favorite. I know Matt from Matt's Fantasy Book Reviews gave this like a 2-star, and he gave the other ones 5 stars. That's ridiculous in my mind. I don't know where that comes from. This one, I think, is on par with The Darkness That Comes Before. When I first read it, I said it was better. Now I'd probably say that it was on par. One of the things that I really love about this series, and I have very mixed feelings about the series as a whole, like as a project, I have some mixed feelings, but one of the things that I like is that the characters truly feel like they're from a completely different time and place. They don't feel like 21st century characters placed in a fantasy setting. They have very different morals, cultures, senses of right and wrong, sexual mores, what have you. So like in the Wheel of Time, and this is a personal criticism, I'm sure other people will disagree, but it often felt like teenagers from the 90s but set in a fantasy world, and you never get that feeling here. This reminds me of, to make a comparison, is if you ever watch movies by Robert Eggers, and I'll especially highlight The Northman, but it's true of Nosferatu and The Witch, and The Lighthouse as well. But especially in The Northman, you very much get this feeling of alienation from the characters because they're so different. They're so off-putting. They're so different from the way we normally view things, and you don't have some bard character in the Northman being like, "Now this murder is wrong, don't you know?" and kind of wagging the finger, hand holding the audience. And Baker doesn't do that either, which I think is very commendable. Part of what makes this fantasy series feel so different is how much Baker pulls from other genres. Like, there's a lot of horror in this trilogy, but we still have a lot that feels like a spy or a detective novel as well. And a lot of people will say that this trilogy is like very Crusades inspired, and there's some truth to that. I would say that this is like as Crusades inspired as A Song of Ice and Fire pulls from War of the Roses. But this pulls from all sorts of other things. In terms of other things that it pulls from, I mean, it takes a lot from Shakespeare, Homer, John le Carre. From what I have been told, I haven't read le Carre yet, but it pulls a lot from Dune and the Silmarillion, a lot. And there's probably just as many nods to the Iliad as there are to the Bible, and also a lot of like Blood Meridian and Cormac McCarthy, especially in these last two books. So I think Jordan from iWizard, my friend there, said that he had heard it compared to like Lord of the Rings as written by Cormac McCarthy, and he disagreed with that a little bit. And like, yeah, it's not a perfect comparison, but if you need like a 2-sentence pitch for it, that is close enough that it'll give you the idea there. A couple things just on the world building here, because I've consistently said that like I like Baker's world building, and his fantasy work is great, and I like his characters a lot. I think they're interesting. I think they're fun to follow. Um, in terms of negatives, I feel like his writing is often, and I know one of the big things that Baker fans really, really love is his writing. And it's not that I dislike it, I just feel constantly like it's bloated. And maybe this is because I'm in the middle of The Judging Eye, and I think The Judging Eye is a very different book from any of these first three. It's the first book in Aspect Emperor, but there's a lot of The Judging Eye that I'm like, could we have had a little bit better editing on this? And I know there's a whole story there, but just to say, I feel like he can get a little overly long. But in terms of some of the world building here, that's good. Let's go over some of this. So having a school of wizards that always are dreaming of the first apocalypse every night is a brilliant way of creating backstory and giving us exposition without it feeling clunky. So and there's questions of like how much of the identity of the founder of this school, Seswatha, is in all of the other wizards too, since they're reliving his life in their dreams. So that's a great thing. Yeah, there's a lot I could say about this. But I don't know how much of it I'll say here. I've been really, really debating making a full review of the Prince of Nothing trilogy. The problem is that there's some key, like especially philosophical points that I disagree with Baker on, and I'm not sure how much it's going to stir the pot one way or another, or how much I can articulate it in the way that I want to. So I've been on the fence about making it, but man, I just, even after finishing the Thousandfold Thought, it hasn't left my head. I'll say, yeah, even though this is characterized as the weakest of the trilogy, I don't get it. I think this one was as good as any of the others, really. I don't know why this one would turn you off. This one is really just about dealing with the consequences of your actions. And if like your whole thing is you're mad that the Holy War didn't go the way that you'd think it went, like, well, I don't know what to tell you. Like, Baker has been signaling for the entire trilogy that this is not what you think. The people that you think are controlling this are not actually in charge. So anyway, let's see where we drop this in terms of the tier ranking here. I would say the Thousandfold Thought, probably I would drop it right below the Bloodstones, right above Dark Tower. For me, I don't know if this is ever going to be a favorite series of mine. I really, really admire The Warrior Prophet, especially. All the other books, and we'll hold off judgment on The Judging Eye until I finish it, but all the other books by Baker that I've read so far have been like solidly like 4 stars so far. So that's where we're going to drop that for now. Let's move on to something a little bit lighter. Let's talk about Andrew D. Meredith. So I had not planned on reading any Andrew D. Meredith this month, and I read 2 books by him. So we're going to talk about it. The first is Fourscored. This is the sequel to Meredith's novel Thrice. This is a not a Scandinavian fantasy, which I have been saying. Andrew very kindly corrected me. It is Slavic fantasy. So instead of think like Scandinavian more refers to think like Norwegian and Vikings and stuff like that. Slavic is more think like The Witcher. I'm like, aha, yes. So this is the further adventures of Jovian, Joven, the guardian of the magical boy Leaf. This time, Joven and Leaf accidentally get pulled into a plot where a foreign cult, one could say a blood cult, seek to track down Leaf, seek to track down a friend of theirs, but sees Leaf as like a target as well. And so, of course, they have to flee once again and end up staying with a family who runs a large fruit orchard. There, they'll encounter magical creatures, both, you could say, magical and mundane, both friendly and dangerous. They encounter old enemies and secrets about Joven's past that will change the story forever. So I liked Thrice a good bit. I liked it a lot, but it's like a 4-star book in my opinion. There's other places where that setup could be taken, and Meredith takes it to those places in the sequel. Meredith keeps the same overall like wholesomeness of the story, the same delightful tone. I still say if you want a book that is just set in like the Hobbit parts of Lord of the Rings, the Shire, all of that, like these are the books for you. Like they're really good for that. But this one I liked quite a bit more than Thrice in a lot of ways. This one has a much more engaging plot in my mind, and the Fourscored, like those characters specifically, are very compelling antagonists, much more so than those of book 1. And the way Meredith concludes all of this is definitely not what I expected, and has me excited for book 3. Rather than just repeating what worked in book 1, Meredith, he expands on it. He takes necessary risks. And for those who have read the book, I'll say that everything in the orchard is perfect and probably my favorite portion in the book. The main negative that I have in this is still the same from book 1, which is a positive that kind of becomes a negative. So the positive is that this is a relatively short book. Like Meredith doesn't outstay his welcome. We were talking about that with Baker outstaying his welcome. Like Meredith doesn't do that. But for such a short book, there is a lot of, my opinion once again, of in-world politics and world building to keep up with. And personally, this is me. I had a hard time keeping up with all the names of kingdoms and princes and families straight when we had very little context for most of those places, and we've spent very little time with most of those. So I had a hard time with context there. So on the whole, I've enjoyed both of these Needle and Leaf novels by Meredith. I look forward to reading more books by him. If you want like a great self-published fantasy author to get into, like Andrew D. Meredith, I can't recommend highly enough. I think this is great stuff. I think this is great. Meredith has said that a lot of people will use this as like palate cleansers in between heavier reads, and there's definitely a place for that. Like it definitely fits the bill if that's what you're looking for. So Fourscored, let's take a look at it here. And you know what? We're probably going to drop this just above the Thousandfold Thought, just under Bloodstones. Great novel. Really liked it. And while we're on the Meredith train, let's talk about what may have been my favorite book of the month, depending on how you cut it. And this is half of where we get the title from. So there's a lot of kitschy fantasy subgenres now, and I kind of react to some of that. And I swore that I would never read LitRPG, and I'm never going to read cozy fantasy. This just isn't my thing. So what's a way to start reading cozy fantasy, and that is have Andrew D. Meredith write it. So Quaint, Creatures, Magical, and Mundane is a cozy fantasy written by Meredith. I think the short way of describing it would be like classical fantasy characters in a Zootopia setting mixed with like all creatures great and small. So James Herriot. Okay, so this is the story of a giant named Rick who runs a vet and pet shop with his wife, who's an elf, his assistant, who's a dwarf, and his maid, who's a gnome. Rick is new to the town, but was formerly an inspector and finds himself being drawn into some suspicious plots around town that may be more connected than they seem. problems with a local beehive, a pet food company that might be hiding secrets, etc. This is even shorter than the Needle and Leaf books by Meredith, which is why I need to get to his Collation Saga relatively soon, because I keep just reading his shorter books, and I know the Collation ones are more substantial. This was my favorite of all the books that Meredith has written. I appreciated this in similar ways that I did to Aurelia from very early on of this year. This reminded me in some ways of the powerful, powerful message at the heart of Our Town by Thornton Wilder. Our Town by Wilder is one of probably my second or third favorite play out there, and number 1 and 2 would be Shakespeare. Our Town is one of my favorite pieces of writing out there. Our Town is one of the most impactful pieces of writing and like life-changing pieces of writing for me. I think it's a very powerful story, both like heavy and cautionary, but also a celebration of the joy of living well, working a job, having family and friends. And this book really brings that to the forefront about there is a joy, there is satisfaction in living a good life, working a job, even if you're not changing the world, even if you're not out there doing something politically. Please, dear God, there's enough of that. And that like the best way to help fix the world, save the world, etc., is like for you to live well, for you to bring joy to people around you. The relationships in this are excellent. Like Rick and his wife are at the dead center of this story. And it's a realistic marriage. It's not a perfect marriage, but it's a very good marriage, and it's delightful. There's also a lot in this book about the thought behind and the effort that it takes to run a small business, similar to the attention to detail that's in the Needle and Leaf, like the tradesman parts of those book. And there is my buddy boy waking up. So we may be ending up doing this in 2 recording sessions, but I'll say similar to the Dresden Files, there's a lot in this about like encountering quirky fantasy creatures and coming up with like weird ways to interact with them or capture them or tame them, etc. So like I said, fantasy Zootopia. Every creature in this, including the kitchen sink, is in it. It's very colorful, and there's a good bit of culture that's also developed between the different races in small but meaningful ways. So as with the Needle and Leaf books, Meredith knows how far to push these concepts and doesn't bloat these books or outstay his welcome. I don't know that I'm doing this justice other than to say, like, this book was impactful to me, meaningful. I appreciated this one maybe more than any other single book that I read this month. So let's see here. We're going to take a fantasy, cozy fantasy novel that I never expected that I would read. We're going to drop at the bottom of excellent there. Like, this was a great, great read. Easy 5 stars. Highly recommend this, guys. Like, go check it out. Even if cozy fantasy isn't your thing, which I definitely don't think it's mine, and I don't know that this is going to be a big new genre for me, but I'm glad I read this one. It's great. Andrew, thanks for the book, and yeah, I can't wait to get to the Collation Saga by Andrew in the future. Is this thing on? Well, we are one lawn that has been mowed. We are one baby that has been put down for bed for the night, and we are just that much closer to finishing up this tier ranking. So thank you all for bearing with me as we do something that's never before been seen on the iSamways channel, dare I say, on the internet. Let me see what my next read was that we need to talk about. Yes. Let's see here. This would be The Case of Charles Dexter Ward by H.P. Lovecraft. So, I've mentioned before, I've been going through some of Lovecraft's work. I went through At the Mountains of Madness last year, and I don't know if it was just that the language was difficult, if it just didn't click with me, if I read it at a wrong time. I don't know what happened, but At the Mountains of Madness was a disappointment. And then I went through a couple of others. I went through a couple of his very early ones. Like, what's the one in the cave? That's with, like, it was a man. That one. I read the first one. Is it The Alchemist is his first one? And it was just like, okay, what's the deal? And then earlier this year, I've gone through The Color Out of Space, The Call of Cthulhu, The Dunwich Horror, The Outsider, whole bunch of other ones. This is basically just the greatest hits. And Case of Charles Dexter Ward, I believe, is the only full novel that he wrote. It's a short novel, but it's a novel nonetheless. And this one is about a young man who lives in, at least at the time of Lovecraft writing it, relatively modern times, learning about a forgotten, lost ancestor of his who was a warlock of some kind. And in his search back into this family history, it ends up the main character, the one we follow, driving him mad and into horrors that he could not comprehend. So it's a short book, so I'm leaving my summary of it pretty short. Because Lovecraft, there's a couple good things to be said here. First is there's some really weird sci-fi stuff that Lovecraft plays with here that is unexpected if you've only read the Eldritch horror stuff. This is part of what's it called? He's got it's called Dreamscapes, Dream Cycle, something like that. He's got a kind of a separate set of mythos that isn't as much about big aliens and tentacles and stuff. And that's what this is from. I'll say this, Lovecraft works better in short form, but this is very good for what it is. This is a very good, it's a short book. You can get through it in a couple of hours, maybe one or two sittings. There's very little dialogue in this novel, and that's pretty common for Lovecraft, at least from what I've read, but even so, this was eerie and engaging, and this had one of the better and more interesting twists in any of Lovecraft's stories that I've read. The ending was excellent, and Lovecraft has this problem where he tends to over-explain the endings. I mentioned the one with the cave again and the alchemist, those. He's like, let me spell out in fine detail in case you miss it. Here is what the big twist is. And Charles Dexter Ward, he makes it really clear what it is, but the ideas that he's playing with get convoluted enough that you kind of need that clarity. So I enjoyed this one quite a bit. It was good to get to read this. This one specifically was on my radar because Christopher Rocchio mentioned that this was, I think, his favorite Lovecraft story, or at least he listed it as a favorite. So I'm probably going to drop this right in the bottom of good. This was really enjoyable, really entertaining. I'm glad I read it. It's being one of Lovecraft's longer works is good to kind of get it under my belt here. All right, next up, what do we have here but Level Unknown by David Dalglish. So a couple months ago, I reviewed The Radiant King by David Dalglish, and then, as I'm sure you all are sick of hearing about, got to interview David Dalglish, which was a joy and a pleasure, and really nice guy. And then after that, we've kind of kept in touch a little bit, just messaged each other back and forth, and he was like, I'm not sure what you'll think of this one. It's my LitRPG story. I'm kind of trying to branch out, do something a little different, but it mixes sci-fi stuff with the LitRPG, and the fantasy parts of it are very Dark Souls. And that kind of perked my ears up. And this was the other one. So I had the cozy fantasy I swore I would never read. I swear I'd never read LitRPG. No to dungeon crawler Carl. I'm resisting this just because the hype train needs some darn common sense in it. So I was like, all right, if I'm gonna try LitRPG, this is David's new book. He's got a sequel coming out, I think in May. He's got the sequel to this coming out, and then the third book coming out, I think in September. So I'm like, this is interesting enough. I will give it a try. And so, full disclosure, I wouldn't call myself buddy with David Dalglish by any means, but I would say I'm at least an acquaintance. I'm friendly with him, so I want to be upfront about this. But I enjoyed this more than I expected. Let's talk a little bit about what this is about. So Nick is our main character, and it's set in some far future version where a lot of people aren't living on Earth, they're living on other terraformed planets, and Nick's older brother, Simon, is the head officer on a far futuristic space station that has just picked up a 50-ton alien artifact. And when trying to interface with this artifact, Nick finds that he is teleported into another state of being that resembles a medieval world with a black sun. That's the sun you can see pictured on this cover. Let me just stop and say, I don't necessarily love the font on this cover, but in terms of the art with the witch creature design and the black sun and the mountains, and even the human guys, it's fine. It's not bad, but it's fine. But the witch and the sun and everything is 10 out of 10. Love this cover. Very eye-catching. And the use of color on it is great. So, resembling a medieval world with black sun. There, the local villagers immediately see Nick as a demon and proceed to murder him. And then he respawns in the real world and then tries coming back into this alternate dimension, whatever it is. Nick can respawn into the world and quickly finds ways to level up, get stronger, get away from these villagers that are constantly trying to murder him. He must uncover the mystery of what this other dimension is and how does it connect to this alien artifact. Is it aliens? Is it a common ancestor? Or is it something much, much stranger? The best way to describe this is it's like The Martian meets Groundhog Day meets Elden Ring. Okay, so there's a lot of like a sense of humor, a sense of snark like there is in The Martian, but it's not an out and out comedy like I've gotten the impression that Dungeon Crawler Carl is. So there's some real heavy stakes in this book because of the Elden Ring influence. This is not like lit RPG in the sense of like that's all it is. Like Dalglish is pulling from a lot of things here. So even if you're not a lit RPG fan, there's a lot here that I think would interest people. At least it did me. There's a good mix between set fantasy and the sci-fi stuff. There's a surprising amount of stuff that happens on the space station. I won't say like it's probably less than a fourth or a fifth of the book, but enough that it kept it interesting, and I'm really fascinated to figure out how the mystery of this artifact ties into the lit RPG stuff. As always, like Dalglish writes his action well, and the book moves at a great pace. Once again, it doesn't outstay its welcome. Like this is a big thing. You'll get mad points with me as a reader if I feel like you're not just spinning your tires to exceed like some page length that you've set up. So one of the other interesting things that Dalglish does here is it's very easy to do this like, oh, and now he's inside of a video game, sort of like what Tron does. And from what I know, I haven't read a lot of lit RPG, but I've heard plenty of people talk about it, and I get the impression that a lot of lit RPG can do that. And this quickly establishes that it isn't a simulation, that these are real people that Nick is facing, is fighting, and is killing. And so that adds stakes to the action as well, but also some dark humor to the story. Once again, my impression is that a lot of lit RPG goes from mainly just one point of view, like the main character, or if there's several players, just those point of views. And for this one specifically, we get point of views of some of the people within whatever this alternate dimension is, whatever. And it's in that moment that I went, oh, like this story isn't what I expected. And just like Elden Ring, there's elements of like a decaying world, a world that's dying, and it's not clear why. And also you get very much the impression, like in Elden Ring, that like anything can kill you. Like you start off very low, and like I'm not good at Elden Ring. I enjoy the bit that I play, but like village guards kill me all the time, And so there's a similar element to that here at play. And I'll say this also, just like in Warbreaker, best character in this story is a talking sword. So I did not think I would like lit RPG. I don't know that I will like it as a genre, but Dalglish really surprised me with this. It's a lot better than I expected it to be. I don't enjoy this one quite as much as The Radiant King, but I do enjoy it quite a bit. So let's go over to the tier list and see where it goes. All right, so I'm going to drop Level Unknown. Let's take a look here. It's either between, it's either going to be at the top of good or near the bottom of very good. And I think if we look at it here, I think we're going to drop it right at the top. Psych, we're going to put it just below, just above Thousandfold Thought. We'll rub it into R. Scott Baker. Again, some of his fans need to be taken down a peg. That is a joke. Many of his fans are delightful people, and you all know exactly who I'm talking about that are delightful people. So let's look at another book here. And what we're going to take a look at, and I think this is one of the last books that we'll cover here. Well, actually, let me pause for a moment and let's talk about a DNF. So one of the books that I announced in my TBR video, and we can talk about how my TBR videos might need to change too, and I've already begun work on that, but I said I was going to read The Suicide Motor Club by Christopher Buehlman. I got about halfway through that book, and then Chance Dillon's book came in. I got an arc of that. nearing the end of that. Did not finish it in time for this wrap-up, so that's okay. We'll get to it in the next wrap-up. But I realized that the Suicide Motor Club might work for me in the future, was not working for me now. Did not want to just push through just for no reason when I had more interesting stuff coming up, like Chance's book. So I put it down. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, guys, like here we have, let me see here. I think I just messed this up. How to make this work? Boom, there we go. Shadow of the Torturer. Shadow of the Torturer by Gene Wolfe. Like, what more do I need to say? Like, this is sort of my shtick on YouTube now, is talking about Gene Wolfe among other things. So let's just come over here to the tier list. This is obviously a reread for me. So we're gonna drop it at the top of the reread thing. It's probably tied with Till We Have Faces. Like, Till We Have Faces is really, really good. So I don't know that I definitively put book one and Book of the New Sun over Till We Have Faces, but it's really good. I have another video on Shadow of the Torturer coming up, because even with the discussion on Talking Stories channel, which you should definitely check out if you haven't, even with that, there's a lot of thoughts and things that I picked up on my reread of this that I wanted to put into a video. So sort of as like a compendium, spoiler-free, like compendium to that. So that should be out pretty soon here. Next, let's talk about the Tim Powers of it all. So this is Alternate Routes by Tim Powers. This is one of his more recent novels. This is the short way of putting it is that this is a ghost novel, and I picked this one up. I have several other Tim Powers books lined up, Drawing of the Dark, Anubis Gates, Declare, a few others. But I picked this one up because Audible had it in their free catalog. So I was like, all right, I'll try this one out. And this book is really, really good. So just like Tim Powers, it leans heavily into concept, maybe sometimes leaving the plot to be a little convoluted. But let's talk about what this concept is. So it's a little tricky to explain, because in some ways this, as with all of Powers' work, this comes from the slightly pulpy tradition of weird fiction. So think, Lovecraft and Howard come from that tradition. People say like Clark Ashton Smith comes from that. Wolfe tends to write very much in the weird fiction vein, and Tim Powers is like heavily rooted in that. It feels like elevated pulp in a lot of ways. So how to describe Alternate Routes? So it's set in like 2017 Los Angeles, and there are, let me see if I can get this coherently, potential energy fields that are created by the vast amount of moving souls within a close proximity to each other and at high speeds along highways. These zones of probability also manifest with the energy waves of souls of those who have died close to these zones. Okay, so along highway routes, especially in densely populated areas, the government, people who have the proper radio technology, can literally speak to, and it's not quite like ghosts. Well, it's ghosts, but it's not quite like this is the disembodied soul of someone. It's more like the echoes, like the leftover shell of the person that's still there that they can communicate with. Government has a program, can communicate with these ghosts to track people that the ghosts were close to back when they were alive. So say you are a criminal, but you have a family member who got killed by one of these highways. The governments will try to reach out to your family member's ghost who died. And because that ghost is sort of like fixated on you, is following you, they can use speaking to the ghost as like a tracking mechanism. So ex-Secret Service agent Sebastian Vickery was once a part of the top detail that protected the president, I think is Obama specifically. But when he heard something that he wasn't supposed to on one of the ghost radios, he must go on the run from his own government that's trying to kill him. Now, several years later, the agency has finally caught up to him, and his old friend, Ingrid Castine, breaks her oath to protect him. So, Tim Powers changes up his style depending on what he's writing. So, for example, The Stress of Her Regard is very much written in the style of Dracula and Frankenstein, these gothic horror novels, because it is written as sort of a pastiche of gothic horror vampire novels. In the same way, this is written as a play on cop novels, thriller novels. Think Lee Child, Robert Ludlum, Andrew Clavin. Obviously, I'd throw that out. But as always, with these pastiches that he does, there's a supernatural twist to it. And this one is very well thought out and very well incorporated into the main plot. Um, so, like, for example, the ghost can. I'm trying to think of how all of this worked, but like the ghost can. You can start to get sucked into the ghost realm by different ways, and the one way to ward ghosts off, because they're immaterial, they're not. There's no substance to them. You can start reciting math to them as a way to ward them off, because it's a very concrete, like mental. It's sort of like the way that you wake yourself up from sleepwalking or from that state of lucid dreaming. So there's a lot of like dreaming stuff that Tim Powers uses in this. There's also a lot of symbolism about life, fertility, and stagnation. So without going too much into spoilers here, I'll say that there's a main character in the story who had a procedure done to prevent him from ever having children. And so because of that, but he was married. And so first of all, that has dramatic negative effects in the story, which is something I've never really read as being like a real life circumstance, that I've never really read a novel that addresses with it directly. So that was interesting. But also, what happens is some of the characters end up interacting with once again, we talked about these being potential energy fields, like the echo potential energy ghost of who this person's children would have been had he not gone through with that procedure. So once again, like very weird, like this is playing into some symbolic stuff, and there's stuff with Icarus and the Greek myths about the labyrinth and the Minotaur. And like I said, this one I think gets a little bit lost in the weeds. I think Tim Powers gets he lost me a little bit, especially near the end of this novel. I really enjoyed this, but this is nowhere near as good as The Stress of Her Regard, not by a long shot. I would probably drop this near the top of The Liberation. I enjoyed this one a lot. It's fun. But it is a little bit convoluted if you're trying to get into Tim Powers. If you're interested in this one, if it particularly calls to you, I'd say like go for it. But the one that of the ones that I've read, Stress of Her Regard is still my favorite. So let's move on to the last one here. Let me take a quick drink. And that is going to be so I felt like it was kind of timely. I've been meaning to read this book for a while. This was on my list that I made at the beginning of, or at the end of last year, of books that I want to read in 2025. And this is also one of the late Pope Francis's favorite books. Now, once again, I'm not a Catholic, at least not yet. But this has been on my radar for a while. After his passing, it came to my attention again, because I was like, oh yeah, that was a book that he said was one of his favorites. And I'm speaking, of course, of, did it again. I'm speaking, of course, of Lord of the World by Robert Hugh Benson. And to give a brief synopsis of it, this is a very early member of the dystopian fiction club. So think 1984, Brave New World. And this one is very similar, except it is 1984 versus the Catholic Church. So in terms of the world building, basically most of the world has come together into just several massive continents that are ruled by single governments. So like all of North America, and I think South America too, is like one country. Most of Europe is just one country. Most of Asia is one country. You get the picture. And so there are these really big governments. Once again, a lot of the religions of the world have all kind of homogenized together. So you've got a lot of like Hinduism and Buddhism, and I think Islam all combine into one. You have a huge boom in atheism and agnosticism. And then Robert Hugh Benson was a Catholic priest. And I should say from the outset, like, this book is a great, like, member of the sci-fi genre. There's some good things here. There's some interesting things here. This is an incredibly Catholic book, like very Catholic. And here's a way to illustrate it. So we're talking about all these religions coming together. And then Robert Hugh Benson basically says, yeah, and like all the Protestants either like woke up and decided, you know what, like the Catholic Church is right all along, which they should have known this whole time. And so they either converted to Catholicism, or they did what we've always secretly known, which is they fell away and basically showed that they weren't really believers in the faith to begin with. So cheeky stuff like that. I'm exaggerating, but not much. And so what we see here is the rise of a antichrist-like figure that is uniting all of these governments together into one central power, and the only force that's standing against it, and the main aim of like this one world government's persecution, is pointed against this minuscule remnant of the Catholic Church that is left. And so we primarily follow one priest who is struggling with his faith as he ends up becoming more of an important player in this whole conflict between this corrupt Orwellian style government versus that's trying to crush his faith. And he must grow in his own faith and what he believes. And then we also have as some main characters a husband and wife who are sort of the right hand man to this Antichrist like leader figure. So a very interesting setup. Obviously, Robert Hugh Benson deals a lot with themes of faith and belief and who should be your authority and who should rule you. But to be perfectly honest, this novel has not aged the best. It's not awful. If it sounds interesting, pick it up, read it. It's not a terribly long novel, but if you read sci-fi novels from the era, I'm specifically thinking of H.G. Wells, you'll kind of get the gist of the way that Robert Hugh Benson writes. There is a lot of just general summarizing of huge passages of time, of things that could be fleshed out but aren't and are just kind of skipped over. This book is solely worth reading for the ideas and specifically the character arc of that one Catholic priest. I think that is an interesting arc that Benson takes in some gutsy ways. This book, like, it does kind of go like balls to the wall where it's just like, what? Like, that's bizarre. You're pushing this concept to almost an absurd level. Like, it doesn't quite get to absurd, but it is almost there. And like I said, very Catholic once again. So this one, in terms of all the books that I read this month, I'd probably say this one is the weakest, while at the same time, like, being one of the most interesting too. So, not a bad novel by any means, but I will put this at the top of just okay. This is definitely better than Sharp Ends, which, to be perfectly frank, and we're going to do this live, I've really, actually, you know what, screw it. There, we'll put it there. And Zach, that was for you. Zachary Shea and I have been bonding over our dislike for Sharp Ends. I was going to go right into Age of Madness, and I have not, because of Sharp Ends and how mid of a book I thought Sharp Ends was. So we're dropping that down to not great. So Lord of the World, it's worth reading for the historical aspect of it. It is worth reading if it is of interest to you. Or if you're a Catholic, I think there's a timely value in reading it now because of the Pope's passing. But other than that, like, this is not a book to read because it's like, oh, what's a really interesting, like, dystopian novel? Like, aside from the faith aspects, the Francis aspects, or the just history of the genre aspects, there's not much of a reason to revisit this one other than that. So that's my brief 2 cents on Lord of the... All right, we have all sorts of glitches. My internet just bummed out for some reason. So I'm about 75% of the way through Mercy Tears of the Fallen by Chance Dillon. This has been a tough month for me in terms of reading. Most of what you're seeing listed here was done by audiobook. But just because of personal stuff, it's been tricky to get some reading done. And to be perfectly honest, I might owe Chance an apology for this. I think reading his book has suffered just because of my difficult life circumstances. It is a dense book, though. I think the best way I came up with describing it is like if you're reading A Song of Ice and Fire, they kind of ease you in slowly with the first book of Game of Thrones and then slowly ratchet up the number of viewpoints and things to keep track of and houses and lands and world building and all of this until you get to probably Storm of Swords. Well, I don't know, maybe Dance with Dragons is even more dense. But I said it's like reading, like starting the series with just A Storm of Swords and trying to keep up with it all. So I think I know I missed some things even early on in the book because, like, there were things that, once again, Zach from Zachary Shea, he was messaging with me. He's like, I'm thinking this and this and this about the series because he already finished it, about where it's going. And I was like, oh, yeah, I completely missed that, but you're probably right. So I am enjoying it. I think there's a lot of things that Chance does really well. I'm excited to get to the end, and I'm excited to read book 2. So, Chance, thanks for being gracious about all of this. I don't think it is a perfect novel, but I think it's a very ambitious self-published debut, and I think a lot of people will enjoy this, especially people who are fans of epic, dense fantasy. So think Malazan, think like Prince of Nothing, and yeah, I'd say A Song of Ice and Fire too. So there's definitely an audience for this. This is not my favorite style of fantasy, but even still, with sort of my biases and my bad month and all of that, like, there's a lot that I'm getting out of this. And then I'm about 75% of the way through The Judging Eye by R. Scott Baker. And I will probably reserve my thoughts for most of my thoughts for that at a later time, other than to say this isn't what I expected Aspect Emperor to go. It is the easiest Baker book to get into that I've read so far, like shockingly easy. So, like, that's not a bad thing. But also, once again, this could change in the last 25%, but it's pretty easily my least favorite of the series so far. There's a lot of like, where are we going here? There's a lot of stuff that is interesting, but there's a lot of like, okay, get on with it type of stuff. That's fine. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but we'll see where he's going. After this one, though, I might take a break from Baker for a while. Not because it's like, oh, it's so intense, I need, but primarily an issue of practicality, which is I was listening to, I started Aspect Emperor. It was part of the Audible free library, and it went behind the paywall now. So after I finish this one up, I'll need to like purchase them, which is fine. I can do that. I just have other stuff that I've purchased right now that's going to probably take a bit of a priority. So it might be a couple months before I get back to Aspect Emperor, unless, of course, I see a bunch of other people who are getting to it before me, and that I cannot abide. So that's the next plans. Let's see here. Where do we go after here? Once I finish up with Chance's book, I think my next read will be getting to Tori Tekken's next book, Cold Silver for Souls. Once again, very kindly sent me an arc, so I'm excited to get to that. But I don't know what my next audiobook read is going to be. Might be Tim Powers, Drawing at the Dark. Might be a couple of other things. By Blood, by Salt 1, SPFBO 10. So congratulations to J.L. Odom. I announced that would be on my TBR for this next month, so that might be high up as well. But then City of Thieves, I have it by David Benioff. I have that from the library, so I might need to bump that up. Anyway, a lot of different options here, basically. I have some wild cards that I want to throw into this month, and I actually owe Jordan from iWizard. I owe him a buddy read, so we might need to get started on that. Otherwise, I'm gonna never get to it because I don't want to procrastinate. So anyway, guys, once again, obscenely long video. This is not acceptable. Half the books, half the reading time, half the time of the video. Let's shoot for 25. It's going to be better for everyone. So thanks for bearing with me through this chaotic, obscenely long reading wrap up. You're all lovely people. Have a good night. Or day. Or whenever you're watching this. Bye.